The Mafia boss sat in the back seat as his car crawled through traffic. Tinted windows, engine humming, another street he usually ignored. Then he saw her, a little girl, no more than 6, kneeling beside a trash bin. Bare hands, torn shoes, carefully pulling bottles from the garbage and wiping them clean on her sleeve. "Slow down," he said quietly. Across the sidewalk, a woman waited, thin, exhausted, holding a sack already half full. The girl ran back to her, smiling like she'd found treasure. "Good job, baby," the woman whispered, kissing her forehead. Something tightened in the boss's chest. An irritation. A memory he didn't want. Then the girl laughed. The sound cut through him. That laugh. He'd heard it before, years ago, in a hospital room he was never supposed to leave. The girl suddenly looked up, straight at the black car. For a heartbeat, the city disappeared. Same eyes, same dimple on the left cheek, same way she tilted her head when she was curious. The boss's hand froze on the door handle. Because the last time he'd seen a child with that face, a doctor had told him she didn't survive. And yet, here she was digging through trash, smiling at her mother alive. Stay with me until the end, because the truth about that little girl will tear open a past the Mafia boss believed was buried forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Marco Santangelo controlled half the city from the shadows. At 52, he had built an empire that stretched across 3 states. Money flowed through his hands like water. Politicians answered his calls. Enemies disappeared without a trace. His word was absolute law in the criminal underworld. But none of that prepared him for seeing a ghost on a Tuesday afternoon. The little girl with the bottles couldn't be more than 6 years old. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around a face that belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who had died 7 years ago in a hospital bed, while Marco held her hand and whispered promises he couldn't keep. His driver, Tommy, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Boss, you okay back there?" Marco's fingers gripped the leather seat until his knuckles went white. The child across the street was carefully checking each bottle for cracks before placing it gently in her mother's sack. Her movements were precise, deliberate, just like Isabella used to arrange her toys in perfect little rows. Isabella, his daughter, the only person who had ever made Marco Santangelo believe in something beyond power and fear. 7 years had passed since the cancer took her. 7 years since he'd buried a tiny casket and swore never to feel that kind of pain again. The doctors had been certain. Terminal. No hope. He'd watched his little girl fade away despite every specialist money could buy, every experimental treatment, every desperate prayer to a God he'd stopped believing in decades earlier. Yet here was this child, moving exactly like Isabella, laughing exactly like Isabella, looking exactly like the daughter he'd lost. Marco's phone buzzed. Business never stopped, even when the world tilted sideways. "Yeah, boss. We got that meeting with the Colombians in 20 minutes. You want us to cancel it?" Carlos's voice crackled through the speaker. "Cancel it? Months of planning. Millions on the line. I said cancel it." Marco's voice carried the kind of steel that ended conversations. He leaned forward. "Tommy," he said quietly, "park the car. Here. Now. If this part already pulled you back into a memory you thought was buried, comment, 'I felt that.'" The black sedan pulled to the curb 50 feet from where the woman and child continued their work. Marco studied them through the tinted glass. The woman looked to be in her early 30s, with the kind of tiredness that came from too many sleepless nights and not enough meals. Her clothes were clean, but worn thin from washing. She moved like someone used to being invisible to avoiding attention. But it was the child who held Marco's focus. Every gesture sparked a memory he had tried to bury. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating. How she bit her lower lip when examining something closely. The careful way she handed each bottle to her mother, as if presenting a precious gift. Isabella used to do the same thing with the flowers she picked from the hospital garden during her treatments. Each dandelion or half-wilted rose was offered with ceremony, with pride in her small contribution. Marco's chest tightened. He had trained himself not to think about those moments. They belonged to a different man, a softer version of himself that had died alongside his daughter. The Marco Santangelo who existed now had no room for sentiment, no tolerance for weakness. But this child was making him remember everything. The woman said something to the girl, who nodded and scampered toward another trash bin further down the street. Her little legs carried her with determined purpose. Marco found himself holding his breath as she navigated around a broken piece of sidewalk that could have tripped her, just like Isabella used to do when she insisted on walking to the hospital cafeteria by herself, despite the 4-pole she had to drag along. "Boss." Tommy's voice was uncertain. "You want me to run the plates? Check if they're connected to something?" Marco almost laughed. Connected to something. If only Tommy knew how right he was, though not in any way that made sense in their world of territories and vendettas. "No," Marco said quietly. "Just watch." The girl found something in the second trash bin. She held up a small toy car, missing one wheel, but otherwise intact. Her face lit up with the kind of joy most adults had forgotten how to feel. She examined the toy carefully, then cleaned it with the edge of her shirt before tucking it into her pocket. Isabella had done the same thing with a broken music box another patient had thrown away. She'd spend hours trying to fix the tiny ballerina inside, convinced she could make it dance again if she just found the right way to wind the spring. The memory hit Marco like a physical blow. Isabella sitting cross-legged on her hospital bed, tongue poking out in concentration, refusing to give up on something broken. His phone rang again. This time it was Elena. He almost didn't answer. "Marco." Her voice was smooth, distant. "You canceled the Colombian meeting. Is everything all right?" "Beautiful," cold Elena. The woman who had married him for power and stayed for protection, who had played the grieving stepmother with perfect precision when Isabella died, and had been quietly relieved when the reminders of Marco's old life vanished from their home. "I'm fine," Marco said, eyes still fixed on the child. "Something came up. Will you be home for dinner? I made reservations." Home. A mansion filled with expensive art and empty rooms. A place that had not heard a child's laughter in 7 years. "I don't know." Elena sighed. "You've been distant." I said I'm fine. The line went dead. Across the street, the girl turned back toward her mother, the toy car clutched tight in her hand. And for reasons Marco didn't yet understand, he felt the past reaching for him, not gently, but with force. If this part reminded you of someone you lost, someone you still carry with you, comment "They're still with me." The girl was walking back toward her mother now, the toy car visible in her small hand. As she approached, she suddenly stumbled on an uneven piece of pavement. Marco's heart lurched. She went down hard on her knees, the toy car skittering across the sidewalk. Without thinking, Marco opened the car door. "Boss, what are you?" But Marco was already out, his expensive shoes hitting the cracked sidewalk as he moved toward the fallen child. She was sitting up, examining a scraped knee that was already bleeding. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she was fighting them back with the kind of stubborn courage that made Marco's throat close. Isabella had been the same way, never wanting to cry in front of the doctors, always trying to be brave for everyone else. Marco knelt beside the girl, his shadow falling across her small form. This close, the resemblance was even more striking. Not just the features, something deeper, a way of holding herself. "You okay, sweetheart?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. The girl looked up at him. Wide, dark eyes. Eyes exactly like Isabella's. For a moment, neither of them moved. Marco felt like he was staring straight into the past, into a future that had been stolen from him 7 years ago. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I just need to find my car." Marco glanced around and spotted the toy where it had rolled against a fire hydrant. He retrieved it and held it out to her. "This what you're looking for?" Her face transformed instantly. Relief. Gratitude. "Thank you, mister," she said. "I thought it was broken, but look." She held it up proudly. "Mama helped me fix it last night." Marco saw that the missing wheel had been replaced with a small button. The simple pride in her voice nearly undid him. Isabella used to sound exactly the same when she'd managed something difficult. "My mama says," the girl continued, "when you help someone, it comes back to you." She examined her scraped knee again. "So maybe that's why you found my car." Marco stared at her. This impossible child. speaking words his daughter might have said. Then she reached into her pocket. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out a small, worn photograph. The edges were frayed from being handled so often. She held it like a secret. "This is my real daddy," she whispered, glancing toward her mother. "Mama doesn't like me to talk about him." Marco's blood turned to ice. The photograph showed him. Younger. Happier. A picture from a hospital fundraiser. One of the few public events he'd attended for Isabella's sake. The world tilted. Sound disappeared. "Where did you get that?" Marco whispered. The girl's eyes widened. She clutched the photo tighter. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have shown you." But Marco wasn't listening anymore. His mind was racing backward, 7 years, to a hospital room filled with machines and whispered goodbyes. The night before Isabella died, she'd been unusually alert. "Calm, Daddy," she had whispered, her hand finding his. "I need to tell you something important. There's another little girl," Isabella had said. "She looks just like me, and she needs you to find her." Marco had thought it was the medicine talking. Now, staring at the photograph in this child's hands, he understood. Isabella hadn't been imagining anything. She had been telling the truth. "If this revelation shook you, comment, 'This broke me.'" "What's your name, sweetheart?" Marco asked, forcing his voice to stay steady even as his world cracked open from the inside. The girl hesitated, still clutching the photograph like it might disappear. "Sophia," she said softly. "Sophia Martinez." Martinez. The name hit Marco like a fist to the chest. Not from business, not from enemies, but from a life he had tried desperately to forget. 7 years ago, before Isabella got sick, before grief had hollowed him out, there had been a nurse at the hospital, Carmen Martinez. Kind, quiet, steady in a place full of fear. She'd stayed late to read to Isabella, brought extra blankets, made a terrified little girl feel safe when the world was falling apart. Marco had been grateful, more than grateful. For a brief time, Carmen had made him feel like there was something beyond power and violence, something human. But when Isabella's condition worsened, when hope became fragile, Marco had ended things. He told himself it was for Carmen's good, that she deserved better than a man watching his child die. He had never known she was pregnant. Sophia watched him carefully, sensing the shift in his expression. "Mama says my daddy was important," she continued. "She says he didn't know about me. But maybe someday we'd find each other." Marco could barely breathe. Across the street, Carmen called out, "Sophia, come back here, baby." Sophia stood, tucking the photograph back in her pocket. "I have to go," she said politely. "Thank you for helping me." She paused, then turned back. "What's your name?" Marco stared at his daughter. "Marco," he said quietly. Her eyes widened, not with recognition, but with curiosity, and then Carmen called again, urgency in her voice. Sophia ran back to her mother. Marco watched Carmen kneel, inspecting the scraped knee with practiced care. Even from a distance, he could see the love in every movement. This woman had raised a child alone, had kept Isabella's memory alive with a single photograph, had taught Sophia kindness instead of bitterness. Tommy's voice drifted from the open car door. "Boss, everything okay?" Marco didn't answer right away. He was watching a life that should have been his. "Follow them," Marco said finally. Quietly. "Find out where they live. Their situation. Everything." Tommy hesitated. "You want a full background check? I want to know how my daughter ended up homeless." The words hung heavy. Marco climbed back into the car, his eyes never leaving Sophia as she placed another bottle into her mother's sack, her small face glowing with pride. He'd lost one daughter to fate. He wasn't about to lose another to poverty. If this part made you angry at the injustice of it all, comment she deserved better. The next morning, Marco sat alone in his office, overlooking the city skyline. The sun poured through floor-to-ceiling glass, lighting up mahogany furniture and framed photographs of deals, alliances, and victories that had built his empire. None of it mattered. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside him, growing cold. Tommy's report lay open on the desk. 3 pages. Each line tightened Marco's jaw. Carmen Martinez, former registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, laid off 8 months ago after budget cuts. Evicted 6 weeks ago. Currently staying at the Riverside Women's Shelter with her daughter, Sophia. 3 nights a week, sleeping in their car. Marco's fingers curled into fists. His daughter was homeless. The phone buzzed. Elena again. He declined the call, then declined again. The office door opened without a knock. Only one man had that privilege. Vincent Torino stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Marco's oldest friend, his most trusted advisor. The only man who remembered who Marco had been before grief hardened him. "You look like hell," Vincent said, taking a seat. "Didn't sleep?" Marco slid the report across the desk. Vincent read it in silence. "Jesus Christ," he murmured. "That's the nurse. From Isabella's hospital." Marco nodded once. "And you think the kid is yours?" Marco pulled out his phone and placed it on the desk. Photos Tommy had taken. Sophia laughing in the shelter courtyard, sharing half her sandwich with another child, helping her mother carry garbage bags filled with everything they owned. Vincent exhaled slowly. "She looks exactly like Isabella." "Exactly." Vincent leaned back. "Marco, if this is true, bringing her into your world could get her killed." Marco had thought about nothing else all night. Every enemy, every grudge, every rival who would see a child as leverage. "I know," Marco said. "So what are you going to do?" Marco stood and walked to the window. Below him stretched his city. Territory won through fear, maintained through violence. Somewhere in it, his 6-year-old daughter was sleeping on a cot. "I'm going to fix this." Vincent gave a short, bitter laugh. "You can't just throw money at this." Marco turned back. "Then I'll tear down whatever stand in the way." Vincent studied his face. He'd seen that look before, the one that started wars. "This will change everything," Vincent said quietly. "All of it." Marco didn't hesitate. "I already lost one daughter," he said. "I'm not losing another." Vincent nodded once. "What do you need from me?" Marco returned to his desk. "Start with the Moretz," he said. "Send a message." Then his voice softened just slightly. "And clear my schedule. I'm going to see Carmen. Alone. If you were Marco, would you risk your entire world for one child?" Comment: "I'd risk everything." The Riverside Women's Shelter sat in a part of the city Marco rarely visited. Not because it was dangerous, because poverty made him uncomfortable in ways violence never had. Violence was clean, predictable. You took out threats and moved on. Poverty was messy, full of innocent people suffering for reasons that had nothing to do with choices. Marco parked across the street and studied the building. Weathered brick, faded paint, a line of women and children waiting for dinner service. Some clutched garbage bags containing everything they owned. Others held children too young to understand why home was a word they didn't have anymore. He spotted Carmen immediately, still beautiful, despite exhaustion carved into her face. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, scrubs worn thin from too many washes. She was helping an elderly woman up the shelter steps, her movements gentle, patient. Still a nurse, still taking care of others, even when she had nothing left. Sophia appeared beside her, tugging at her sleeve, talking excitedly. Marco watched his daughter gesture with her hands, watched Carmen smile. That same smile he remembered from the hospital hallways years ago. Marco crossed the street. Each step felt like walking toward a point of no return. Carmen. She turned. Recognition flashed across her face, followed instantly by fear. Her hand moved to Sophia's shoulder, pulling the child closer. "Marco," she said cautiously. "What are you doing here?" Sophia looked up, curious. "Mama, this is the man who helped me yesterday," she said brightly. "The one who found my toy car." Carmen's eyes widened slightly. "We need to talk," Marco said quietly. "Alone." Carmen hesitated, then knelt beside Sophia. "Go inside, baby," she said gently. "Find Mrs. Rodriguez. I'll be there in a minute." Sophia looked between them, sensing the weight of the moment. Then she nodded and disappeared into the shelter. Carmen crossed her arms. "How did you find us?" "Does it matter?" "Yes," she said firmly. "We've been careful. We don't cause trouble." Marco met her gaze. "She has my photograph," he said. "She calls me her daddy." Carmen's composure shattered. "She looks exactly like Isabella," Marco continued. "Why didn't you tell me?" Silence. Then Carmen whispered, Because I was terrified you'd take her away. The truth landed hard. I would never. Wouldn't you? Carmen shot back. You take what you want. You destroy what threatens you. What was I supposed to think? Marco had no answer. Things are different now, he said. You still live a dangerous life, Carmen replied. That world destroys everything innocent that touches it. Marco stepped closer. Then I'll destroy the world before it touches her. Carmen's eyes filled with tears she'd held back for 6 years. She asks about you every night, she whispered. Marco handed her a simple card. Tomorrow morning, he said, bring Sophia. I want you both to meet your family. As he walked away, Sophia's laughter echoed from inside the shelter. This time, it didn't haunt him. It promised something new. If this moment hit you as a parent, or someone who wished their parent had shown up, comment she needed him. The next day, Marco's office buzzed with quiet tension. Lieutenants moved in and out, voices low, faces serious. Word traveled fast in his world, and everyone could feel that something fundamental had shifted. Vincent stood beside the window, arms crossed. You're really going through with this, he said. Public moves. Territory realignment. Messages sent. Marco didn't look up from the documents in front of him. I already am. The Morettes had been testing his borders for months. Small attacks. Subtle provocations. Waiting for weakness. They wouldn't wait anymore. Make it clean, Marco said. No collateral. No civilians. Vincent raised an eyebrow. That's a new rule. Marco finally looked at him. So, is having a daughter I didn't know about. By nightfall, the message was delivered. Quietly. Efficiently. No headlines. No bodies left in public view. Just fear, the old kind, reminding the city that Marco Santangelo had not gone soft. He'd gone focused. While his men handled the streets, Marco stood alone in a private room of his mansion. It had been empty for 7 years. Now, staff moved through it carefully, preparing it for a child. A small bed, books, toys, warm light instead of cold marble. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint and something unfamiliar. Hope. Elena watched from the doorway. You're changing everything, she said. This child will expose us. Marco didn't turn. She's already exposed me, he replied. To myself. Elena's voice hardened. And what about me? Marco faced her fully. You were my wife, he said calmly. She's my blood. Elena understood then. The power she'd married would never be hers again. The next morning, a black sedan waited outside the shelter. No guards. No weapons visible. Carmen stepped out first, tense but composed. Sophia followed, clutching her toy car. Marco opened the door himself. Sophia hesitated, then smiled. Hi, Marco, she said. Something inside him broke and rebuilt at the same time. Hi, sweetheart. As the car pulled away, Marco watched Sophia press her face to the window, taking in a world she'd never been allowed to see. This wasn't just rescue. It was reckoning. If you believe a parent should tear the world apart to protect their child, comment no matter the cost. The car rolled through the city in silence. Sophia sat between Carmen and Marco, her small fingers tracing the edge of the window as buildings grew taller, cleaner, brighter. Mama, she whispered, is this where rich people live? Carmen swallowed. Yes, baby. Marco didn't interrupt. He wanted to hear everything. Every thought. Every fear. The gates of the Santangelo estate opened slowly, revealing gardens that stretched further than Sophia could see. Her mouth fell open. Is this a castle? Marco knelt beside her before the car, fully stopped. No, he said softly. It's just a house. And if you want, it can be your house too. Sophia studied his face the way children do when they're deciding whether to trust. Will Mama be safe here? The question hit harder than any threat he'd ever faced. Marco nodded. Always. Carmen watched him closely. Not the empire. Not the power. The man. Inside, the house felt different already. Less like a fortress. More like a home, trying to remember how to breathe. Sophia ran ahead, laughter echoing down hallways that had been silent for 7 years. Marco closed his eyes. Isabella's laugh had sounded just like that. Carmen stopped beside him. You can't buy her love, she said quietly. And you don't get to erase 6 years of absence. Marco met her gaze. I don't want to erase it, he replied. I want to earn what I never deserved. That night, Marco sat beside Sophia's bed as she fell asleep clutching her toy car. For the first time in years, he prayed. Not for power, not for forgiveness, for time. The next weeks changed everything. Marco began taking apart pieces of his empire. Quietly, carefully. Businesses were sold. Routes shut down. Old alliances cut loose. Enemies noticed. But no one dared touch the child who had become his center. Sophia started school. Carmen returned to nursing. And Marco learned how to pack lunches, attend parent meetings, and sit through bedtime stories without checking his phone. One evening, Sophia looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, are you a good guy?" Marco thought about blood on his hands, about fear he'd built his name on. He kissed her forehead. "I'm trying to be." And for the first time, that was enough. Because redemption doesn't come from forgetting who you were. It comes from choosing who you protect. If this story made you believe that even the darkest hearts can change for love, comment redemption is possible. If you want another story at this emotional level, just say the word.